Welcome to The Big Rich Show. This podcast will focus on conversations with friends and acquaintances within the four-wheel drive industry. Many of the people that I will be interviewing, you may know the name, you may know some of the history, but let's get in depth with these people and find out what truly makes them a four-wheel drive enthusiast. So now's the time to sit back, grab a cold one, and enjoy our conversation.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Why should you read 4Low Magazine? Because 4Low Magazine is about your lifestyle, the four-wheel drive adventure lifestyle that we all enjoy. Rock crawling, trail riding, event coverage, vehicle builds, and do-it-yourself tech, all in a beautifully presented package. You won't find 4Low on a newsstand rack, so subscribe today and have it delivered to you. On today's Conversations with Big Rich, we have Ben Falkner, who is the president of Teraflex. His family has a long history in off-road, starting with his grandfather with MEPCO out of Salt Lake City.
Hey, Rich, how's it going?
It's going great. And how are you doing today?
Doing great. The sun's shining and all's good.
Excellent. We're down on the Gulf Coast in Texas, and we haven't seen sun all week. We had just enough break on the 4th of July, Sunday evening, to where they were able to fire off the fireworks here in Port Aransas, and then it's pretty much been raining since.
Man, that's crazy. Is that down by, are you worried about Elsa down there, or is that, I haven't tracked that storm much, but I've heard about it.
No, Elsa is going up from Cuba into Florida and then should hit Georgia and South Carolina. We are in the south coast on what they call the coastal bend, so we're closer to, we're the entry area into the Corpus Christi Bay. So we're pretty, within, 70 miles, 80 miles of Mexico. So it's a really nice area down here, but this we got some kind of a low pressure that came out of the north and is sitting on top of us, so it's creating all this rain, which is fine when you're on a boat. Rain really doesn't affect a boat much because we're already floating.
Yeah, if you don't want to get wet, you probably shouldn't get on the boat.
Correct. So let's jump right in and tell us about your history, where you grew up, and where you went to school, some things like that. We'll get started that way.
Okay, so I was born in Murray, Utah, which is up here in the Salt Lake Valley for those that don't know. Shortly after, we moved down to a town called Manti that's down in central Utah, and we lived down there for I think around 8 years and loved that place. Loved small town living. I loved the fact that I could get on my dirt bike and just go wherever I wanted and nobody cared. And that was great.
How old were you when you moved to Manti?
2 or 3, too young to remember.
Okay.
So all my young childhood memories are all of Manti that I actually remember. And it was a great place to grow up. Lots of good friends and plenty of time on bikes and dirt bikes and going up in the mountains, which are just right outside of town there. It was beautiful. Loved it. And I loved the small town feel. And so when we moved back to Salt Lake, my dad would get in trouble for leaving his keys in the rig because down in Manti, everybody had keys in the rig.
Right. I can understand that. That's I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, but after college, pretty much Placerville, California, small town, 10,000 people, on the way to Tahoe, and same thing. We lived on the end of the road was dirt past us, and there was no and only 2 houses. So you didn't take the keys out of the vehicle. You never locked the house.
Yeah.
But that was really cool. That's my kids grew up there so too as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love the small town stuff. And then we moved back up into Salt Lake area, and we lived in Sandy basically for the rest of my life. My dad started working for my grandpa again. He worked for him before, and then we went down to Manti, and he was service manager for Ron Green Chevrolet down there. And then grandpa asked him if he would come back, and they partnered up, and he came back, and I think that was in 89 or 90. And then basically we've been up here ever since, and we love this area too. It's great.
Okay, so when you were in that school age,
Uh-huh.
a small town, so it very rural. The
Yep.
the school, was it multiple grades or a lot of grades all in one school, or did they have it separated between like an elementary and then a middle school and high school?
Yeah, I was only there for elementary school, but they
Okay.
had 5 grades there, I believe. And I think they had even a couple of the small towns outside of Manti that kids would come from to go to school there, because there was towns around that were even smaller than Manti. And Manti was, I think, only around 3,000 people at the time.
Oh wow. Okay.
Um, but yeah, and then high school, I know that there was multiple towns that went to the high school too, but I wasn't there for that experience. So
Okay, and then after you guys moved back up into the Salt Lake Basin from Manti, what town did you move into then?
we moved into Sandy, which
Sandy.
is just south of Salt Lake, and that's a great place to live. I went to Silver Mesa Elementary there, had some great experiences, great friends there, and then went on to go to Churchill Junior High, and then Hillcrest High School, and that was pretty much my school. I didn't really go to school after high school because I knew what I wanted to do, and I didn't know of any college courses that were going to help me do exactly what I wanted better. And I had a really hard time paying to go to school because I didn't love school anyway, and paying to go to school like crazy.
So when you were in school, say high school, did you play sports, or were you just more, you know, outdoorsy?
I was outdoorsy and a gearhead, so I spent a lot of time dinking around with Jeeps and stuff, and Jeep parts and all that kind of stuff. I actually worked with my dad every chance that I got. Um, and so as young as 8 or 9, I would get super excited when my dad would take me to work, and he'd put me to work, and I loved it. And I would take any opportunity that I could to go to work with him, because I just loved the Jeep parts and figuring out how they worked and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time thinking around with Jeep stuff and just figuring out how all that all works.
Perfect. So let's educate myself and our listeners. MEPCO obviously must stand for something besides MEPCO.
So MEPCO stands for Military Equipment Parts Company.
Okay.
And my grandpa started that in the 50s, and they were buying World War II surplus, and they were basically buying it and reselling it. And they got a lot of Jeep parts in these containers that they would buy. And, you didn't really know exactly what was in all the containers when you go to these auctions. You just, you bid on containers and you get what you get, and then they'd go try to sell it. And they were hoping for stuff like generators and stuff like that you could turn and burn really quick. And they ended up getting a lot of Jeep parts. And so my grandpa came up with a good organizational way to catalog them, inventory them, and him and the people that he would hire ended up being known for being the Jeep guys. And so you would call them to get any of your Jeep needs, and then he would also source them after that, and they would basically find any place that they could, whether it was old inventory or people that were manufacturing, remanufacturing the parts and stuff like that. And before the internet really came on the scene, it was his organizational skills of being able to catalog and inventory those and know exactly what he had and help people find out what they needed, that really helped him grow that business and stuff.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty neat that we were able to get into that, and I feel blessed to be able to be around Jeeps and stuff because I love them. They're a great symbol of freedom to me, and I feel really blessed that Grandpa set the footwork out for us on that.
So is MEPCO still in existence today as a separate business?
No, we actually combined the businesses. For a while they were separate. So Teraflex got started in '96, and MEPCO and Teraflex were separate companies. And then I think in 2000, I want to say 4 or 5, MEPCO was not doing as well as Teraflex, and we wanted to bring the companies together, and we merged the two companies. And so MEPCO is still in the paperwork and everything for the business and the corporation and everything, but as far as the public sees, it's not in existence anymore, really.
Okay. And when Teraflex got started, that was more on the manufacturing side of producing your own parts. Was that correct?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. And before the TJ came out, we just basically, the business had grown into where we were like a 4 Parts or a Mr. 4x4 or whatever. And we were basically just buying other people's parts and reselling them. And so when the TJ came out, we got one of the first ones that was in Utah, and we were all excited about it because the Cherokees and Comanches that we'd had before, just stock for stock, they would pretty much outwheel the Wranglers because they had more flexibility in the front. And we had been making sway bar disconnects for the CJs and YJs, and we'd made them for the XJs. So since we had them for CJs and YJs, we made them for the Cherokees and Comanches. And I remember going on one of the trips that we did was a hole in the rock trip down by Lake Powell, and we got back and we were watching the videos from it, and we'd noticed that the Comanche that we took with us didn't slip or struggle near as much as the CJs and the YJs did. And a lot of the vehicles back then didn't have lockers, so suspension flexibility was a lot more key. So when we got the TJ, we were excited because we knew that the coil spring suspension was going to give us some more flexibility. And so anyway, we called all these manufacturers like Rancho and ProComp and Trailmaster and all these guys that we bought from, and we're like, when are you going to have a lift for these things? Because we got customers that want them, and they're knocking down the door for us. And they all basically said it'll be a year to year and a half out or whatever. And so we decided to make our own lift kit to take care of our customers that had immediate needs or immediate desires. And so we got with a local company that makes springs, and we made sway bar disconnects for them. And there was a company called 4+ Manufacturing that helped us make some of the control arms and quick disconnects and stuff. They were right next door to MEPCO. Yeah, so we started making our own, and it was kind of funny. The first one that we made like a solid square tubed control arm with urethane bushings in it.
Okay.
And we had an RTI ramp, and we're all excited. We got this 3-inch lift we made for it. First time we take it out back to the ramp, and it did worse than a factory one. And we're like, what the heck? And so we pulled the factory one up there, and we're examining it. And the factory control arms are stamped sheet metal. They would flex in the middle. And so we were like, oh, well, we need to rethink this whole control arm thing. So we ended up making a control arm that would pivot in the middle on threads. So we built that, got it out there, and put it on the ramp, and it went, with the sway bars disconnected, it went all the way to the top of the ramp. And we were like, we got something here. And so I can't remember what company, I think it might have been Best Top, was looking for a Jeep to have down at SEMA show. And we ended up getting that Jeep in the SEMA show, and we brought the ramp down there and put it up on the ramp. And a lot of people were really impressed with it. We got a lot of media coverage from the magazines and stuff like that. And so that kind of gave us a nice shot in the arm. And when we started out, we were planning on just making these things until all the other manufacturers came out with theirs, because it was a lot easier to just buy and sell stuff than it was to come up with your own and keep track of all the parts and the kits and all that kind of stuff. But because we got the magazine coverage, and because we got people were excited about it because it worked so well, we ended up deciding that we would just keep going with it. And so that's kind of the beginning, and it's been a fun ride ever since. We've been trying to stay on the front end of innovation, and some of our first ideas, you look back now and it's like, threads in the middle of a control arm, that probably wasn't the best idea, because if threads are constantly moving, they're going to wear out.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how much you tell people that they need to be greased, they don't maintain their vehicles. So the greasing thing became our first nemesis, because you tell people, okay, you need to grease these control arms every time you do an oil change. And I don't know if they didn't do the oil changes or they just didn't grease them when they did the oil changes, but they definitely weren't getting greased. And so then we came up with the next version of the control arms, which were called the Monster control arms. And anyway, there's a lot of products that we've come up with since then. But
so how did you get past the with that Monster? Did you get past the thread and create a joint that was in that area then?
Yeah, so we tried using like metal heims and stuff like that, but the metal heims just made so much noise, and they were so prone to failures, especially in the Salt Lake area, because they use salt on the roads in the winter.
Right.
And a metal heim just was not a very good long-term solution. And so we ended up using a spherical ball that has, instead of having metal races, they had urethane races. And then basically you're just using that movement just like a heim, but with urethane races, and it quieted it down and made it a lot better for day-to-day use. And those were really pretty good too, but then like the unibody guys were always complaining about noise, because the urethane transfers all the noise through. And so we started using rubber on some of the ends and stuff, and that quieted it down quite a bit, which is nice. And then, the control arms, when we moved on to the JK, we moved over all these Monster joints, and they work great, flex great and everything. But when it comes back to the maintenance thing again, people still weren't doing the maintenance, and even less. Like that, once the 4-door came out, you got a whole new group of people that are buying these Jeeps, and a lot of them are moms taking their kids to soccer games and stuff like that, so they don't want to do any extra maintenance if it's not required. And so we ended up, now we have our Alpine bushings that are complete rubber, and those work great. They flex just as much. They hold up a lot longer, and they're zero maintenance, which I love.
Okay. And those are just that whole going with the monster, it's just the ends, correct? Where in the first adaptation of those control arms, you had a twist joint in the middle, correct?
Yeah, so the first iteration had threads that you would slide on in the middle, which also made them adjustable, which was nice because you needed to adjust for caster a little bit. And then they just had urethane ends in the ends, and that worked great until we figured out that, you know, if you're running that type of a control arm for 5 or 6 years and you actually really wheel it, it starts putting fatigue on all the brackets because it's getting rotational movement, but the axle moves sideways as it cycles through the suspension, either in or out, depending on which way you're going. And so your control arm brackets start getting fatigued and cracking and stuff, and it starts ripping control arm brackets off. And so when we went to the monster joint, that had the spherical ball end and then a jam nut, so the threads were tight, so it's still adjustable, but you tighten it down and lock it into place, so your joints on the ends were taking up all the movement instead of the middle of the arm.
Okay. So Teraflex started with the sway bars and then went to a lift kit.
Mm-hmm.
What were the other products that were developed? Maybe not in the time frame, but close to it.
Well, in the beginning, we had the 4-to-1, which was called the Terra.
Terralow?
Yeah, that was actually one of our neighbors in our little neighborhood that we lived in there in Sandy. His name was Pat Fagan, and he had this idea that if you had a compound planetary, that you could have a lot more reduction. And so him and my dad were working on that, and they made it to where you could get a 4-to-1 ratio in the same size package as a 231 planetary. And it took a little machining on the case, and it took making the gears and all that kind of stuff. And I remember the first sets of gears that we were making, we had a machine shop make them, and then we brought them in, and we were actually heat treating them ourselves. And so you get them really hot, throw them in some ATF, and you have a little fire that comes up and all that. And we're all excited because we're making things, ourselves, and it's really cool. Then we went out, and one of the first times we had them out, hardening didn't work. And so you get a little bounce on an obstacle, and all of a sudden the gears would sound like a bunch of broken glass inside the T-case there, and that was really bad.
Yeah.
So that first prototype got pulled out pretty quick, and then we actually had guys that knew what they were doing help us heat treat them, and then that actually worked out pretty good. And the Terra Low was a really great product for a long time, and then Whelen kind of modified into bigger tires and bigger ledges and stuff. Like all the trails in Moab, you used to be able to do them fairly easily with 31-inch tires and a 2-inch lift and that kind of stuff. And the dirt got dug out, and the ledges keep getting bigger and stuff. And so now everybody's wanting lockers, lots of flex, all that kind of stuff. And the gears, we had the 4-to-1 gear ratio, and that worked great because you could crawl, and especially people with manuals, it just made it so your Jeep could crawl up all kinds of stuff. So if you had a 4-to-1 and lockers, you were pretty well set. But everything kept getting bigger and bigger, and once you got up to where you needed a little more wheel speed to get up some of these bigger things, and you got bigger tires, and so you're putting more pressure to it and everything. And anytime you're going in sand with really big tires, it would start getting those little compound planetary gears spinning so fast that we couldn't keep bearings in them. And so we ended up having some struggles with that later. But in the beginning, everybody loved them, and they just thought that they were the greatest. And if you can control yourself and stay at lower RPMs, they're still a great product. But, you know, when you're not making it up something, sometimes you want to grab the next gear and go. And I know that because I blew up a lot of Teraflex.
And it seems to be more prevalent nowadays with so many more people and new people that never started off wheeling. Like when I started off wheeling, it was an old military CJ5, M38A1 on 31-inch tires, and manual steering, manual transmission. You had to learn how to drive. And nowadays, well, starting with the TJ and then working your way on up to everything since then, so many more people are into the sport that didn't learn open and manual.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't understand that, it's not just, burn out and go. It's being able to pick a line. But
yeah, and like when I started driving, the very first thing that I was able to drive, that was a full-size vehicle, was this Willys that we had in our, we had a used Jeep lot, basically. It's kind of like a junkyard, but just Jeep stuff. And we had this old flat fender that had a little 4-cylinder in it, 3-speed, and an 18 transfer case and 44s rear and a 30 front, or maybe it was a 27 or something, I don't remember. But it was an old Willys, and manual steering, manual brakes, and no hydraulics on the clutch or anything. You're just doing the whole pivot ball thing and your linkage that sucks. I loved that thing though. Learning how to drive that thing, we gave it a name. We called it Clarence, and it had a little hoist in the back that we would pick up the engines with. It was a hydraulic hoist, and that was really cool. I just thought that was the neatest thing. But yeah, that's what I kind of learned to drive on. And then wheeling wise, everything we had back in the day was CJs. I mean, I remember when YJs came out and they made a totally different sound than the 4.2 liter. And I was like, I don't know about those. But then we learned that was a much better motor, and things can just keep on getting better. But, square headlights, and then you got this fuel injected motor that, it'll keep running, but it sounds weird.
I've driven Cherokees for years now because it's just a universal vehicle for what I do, putting on events. We have to have something that we can load into our semi-truck, that we can go to the grocery store, that we can, go do trails, Moab or the Rubicon or any of the parks that we visit. And so, the Cherokees have always made sense. But that original 5, what I found about it was the flex is it had the military springs on it, so they were really narrow. The frame itself would twist, so it gave you a lot of contact patch pressure without, you really didn't almost need lockers, because you kept the wheels on the ground, and but at that same point, you had, like I said earlier, you have to be able to pick a line. You just can't drive over big stuff because you got little tires.
Yep.
So now then they stiffen the frames so that you don't have all that body flex, and especially when you have a manual transmission where you can't shift, can't push the clutch in. So they stiffen all that, and now it's gone into the suspension, and that's where the YJ over the CJ, I would imagine that started. And then now with all the link suspension, it's, you can have a very rigid frame. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not a technical guy.
Yeah, that was another thing about the CJs and the YJs is, we used to judge a lot off of how far you'd go up the RTI ramp. And the CJs would always beat the YJs, and we were trying to figure it out and stuff. And my brother had a CJ that he ran up on the ramp, and I was like, man, this thing just flexes so good, but it has the same length shocks. The YJ is maxing out the shocks, the CJ is maxing out the shocks, but this thing's going further. And I started noticing that the frame twisted quite a bit when you would go up the ramp. I was like, oh, there it is.
Yep, absolutely. So then what other products after the Terra Low?
In 99 and 2000, we were working on, people started putting a little bit bigger tires on, and we were starting to break a lot of axles and stuff. And so 99 is when the competitions also started,
right,
with ARCA and stuff like that. And so, we had customers that were breaking axles and wanting to put bigger stuff in, but you put bigger stuff in and all of a sudden you're dragging on the rocks all the time. And so we made, I think it was the end of summer in 2000, we had our first high pinion 60 with a shaved bottom that was our own casting and everything. And we started making axles, and that was a pretty big jump, and it's been really cool. I've loved the axle program ever since. And those first high pinion 60s that we came out with, we called it the Terra 60R, and they worked really good, except for the pinion bearing in the rear. That outer pinion bearing had too much pressure on it and wouldn't get enough oil, so we had some seizing issues. And then we came up with, in 2002, we came up with the CRD 60, and that one has a bigger outer pinion bearing, and we drilled holes in these housings and stuff and ran them on these machines so that we could have windows in to see what was happening with the oil and everything. And that helped us develop the skimmer that's in the CRD 60 to help it skim off of the ring gear and put oil up towards the outer pinion bearing. And after we did that, we've had great success with those in the rear, and also all of our 60 housings in the front.
And you guys, with your axles, it is all 60s, correct? You're not doing 44s or any of the other axles, correct?
We actually do. We have our 60 program, and then we also have our JK44 replacement housings and our JK30 replacement housings. And we will be coming out with JL30 and JL44 axles.
Okay.
To basically replace the housings. So the factory housings on JKs and the JLs are pretty prone to failure, especially once you start using them hard.
Right. They're built real lightweight.
Yeah, they're built real lightweight, and they actually can't handle too big of a hit even in stock form. Like, I had a friend that was driving down Harley's Canyon here by Salt Lake, or his wife was, and she hit a rocket that came down the canyon off the wall, and it was only about as big as a football, but it came up and it hit the diff, and it actually broke the center section.
Wow.
So she hobbled it off the side of the road and called my friend. He went and picked it up, and then he brought it over to me, and he's like, how is it possible that a rock could hit the housing and just bust it like that? And I'm like, it's because they're super thin, and they're not made to take a hit like that. Jeep's working on making them as light as they can to meet CAFE standards and costs and all that kind of stuff. And when they're doing that kind of mass production, they have to trim it wherever they can. And so anybody that uses their Jeeps could end up needing a housing. And so that's been a pretty successful program for us.
Yeah, excellent. I would imagine that a lot of that lightweightness, I don't know what CAP stands for, but is that so that they can get the fuel mileage, so they're lightening the vehicle and that?
Yes. Yes, the vehicle manufacturers have a CAFE rating that they call it, and it's basically across their fleet they need to meet a certain standard, and the standards just keep getting more and more strict. And like, I think that big into the future where they're not supposed to be making internal combustion engines. They're supposed to be all electric. So we'll see what happens with that. But as far as right now, I know that a lot of the reasons that they lighten up, like the JL has aluminum doors and aluminum hood and stuff like that, just to try to lighten it up. And we all want to think that it's because they want to make it lighter and faster and all that kind of stuff. But really, a big part of their driving force is trying to meet those ratings that they need to hit.
Right. Yeah, across the fleet stuff. Exactly.
Yep.
So with the axle program, then the next step in the process was?
So we went to the CRD 60, and then when we moved from being semi-float and unit bearings to full float rear, and then lockout hub front setup, and we made knuckles that were better steering geometry than the factory 60s, and made it so that your JK, even though you put these big 1-ton axles in it, still drove a lot more like a JK. And that actually helped everything as far as like TJs and everything with that steering geometry. It drove a lot better, and it made the JKs a lot nicer to drive, especially if you're using it for a daily driver and stuff like that. And we made them stronger. We separated the ball joints a little bit more so that the ball joints weren't taking as much pressure. And yeah, we've been developing all kinds of parts for them. In 2014 and 15 is when we revamped all that steering and knuckles, and we actually came out with a new front center section that was a dedicated front that had the upper control arm mount for the Wranglers built into the casting, and that made it a streamlined process and made it a lot nicer to manufacture them.
Okay, so then there wasn't a weld on, it's a cast, so it's all one piece.
Yeah, so all the ones from 2015 and newer, the front upper control arm mount is all cast in and all ready to go for you.
That's awesome. So when did the Falcon shock program happen?
So the Falcon shocks in 2016 at the SEMA show, we were talking to one of the guys that used to work at Fox. His name's Paul Cox, and we were actually looking into doing some other investments and stuff like that. And but after my dad and I and Bryce, he's one of our engineers, had been talking to Paul, we decided we wanted to try to play in the shock field. And so Paul came to work for us, and or actually I think it was SEMA show 2015, because we actually started working on it in the beginning of 16. So anyway, so 2016 was kind of a building year for working on all the drawings and all that kind of stuff that we had to do, making shocks for all the different applications, drawings and all that stuff, and then doing all the tuning and everything. And I think we actually started selling them in 2017. And the tuning system that we use has more rebound than a lot of other manufacturers use. So it makes it a lot more stable on the road.
Right.
And a little bit bigger body. The normal bodies for that time were mostly 2-inch bodies. And we went to a 2 1/4 because a 2 1/2 was really hard to fit without running into the frame on the front and running into stuff in the rear. And so we're like, well, we'll go in the middle and go, because a bigger shock body gives you more dampening, just because you have more area to work with the piston and everything. But you have the limited constraints on how big you can go, just because, Jeep has its limits. And when you start going outside of that, it makes it so that you got to have different mounting and all that kind of stuff. And we wanted to have a shock system that you could just bolt in.
Just a direct replacement.
Yeah. So we got going on that, and to Paul's credit, he's a good tuner, and he knows a lot about hydraulics, and so he helped us get that rolling pretty fast. And we purchased a lot of machines and invested and invested and invested. And 2017, we were looking at it, and things were going pretty good. But at the rate we were selling shocks, it was like, oh man, we're gonna pay for this investment in like 20 years or something. But the sales just keep ramping up, and it's been a really good program for us. And like right now, I think if you order shocks today, you're probably not going to get them until the beginning of September, and we're only into the first week of July.
Right.
So we're going as fast as we can. We've been buying more machines and just doing as much as we can to get that thing going and get them going as fast as we can. And we do all the assembly here, and it's really cool to be able to see the shocks go from raw materials to a finished product in the box shipping out. That's really cool.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed when Shelley and I were able to do the tour of your facilities, to see that program set up. And the other thing I wanted to say is we really like the way that your facility is set up, and not just the layout, but also the design of itself. Just from even the outside of the building, let alone the inside. Kind of each building looks like part of a town. Is the impression that we got, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we kind of lucked into that a little bit, because we were in Murray, and we had this old building that it had to be built in the 50s or earlier, and we were running out of space there. We tried to get a permit to add on to the building there, and they basically said, well, to get the code, you're going to have to actually shrink your building because you need more greenery and all this other kind of stuff. So we said, okay, I guess we'll take ourselves or our taxes that we pay and go pay somebody else. And so we found this place out here in West Jordan, and it was a pretty good deal, and we just fell in love with the Western town theme that it was. There was a company that did decorative concrete that built it, and they built it right before the crash in 2008. And so they weren't able to pay for it, and because the economy tanked so hard in 2008 that they just, the burden of the debt from the building, I guess, just couldn't do it. So anyway, they built it, and they kind of did all their decorative stuff on it, like a showcase to show people what they could do. And so we ended up lucking out and having a really neat looking building because of that.
Okay, so it wasn't you guys intentionally building it that way. It was you stepped into something that somebody else intentionally built to showcase. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's total luck. And we've added some buildings onto the property since then, and we've continued the theme. But yeah, it was just lucky.
Yeah, it's
just good.
It's such a gorgeous facility. If anybody has not, or that has visited or lives in the Salt Lake area, has not gone by and taken a look at it, it is definitely worth the visit.
Yeah, the guys that did all the decorative work on it, and it's crazy because it looks like it has these giant timbers on the inside, but they're all concrete, and they shaped them and made them look like they're wood.
Yeah, I totally, when we walked in, was like, wow, a lot of log work, and then realized it was concrete. Pretty cool.
Pretty crazy, but it's neat to be in, and I really like the environment that it created for us.
So what other products do you guys have in your catalog?
So we do all of our suspension stuff, of course, the Falcon shocks, the axles, and then we do some bumpers and rock sliders and stuff like that. And the tire carrier, basically we made a tire carrier for the JK that doesn't require the hinge to be mounted on the bumper. So it's mounted to the body. And that was kind of a painful process. We went through a lot of prototypes on that. And then once we got it right and we made it, it just went crazy. It was awesome. It's such a good product. I won't have a Jeep without them.
So does it use the same mounting points as a factory?
Yeah, so it uses the same mounts as the factory hinge, but the hinge is beefed up. It's got better pins, better bushings, and it's all stiffened up so that instead of your tailgate flexing while you're going down bumpy roads and stuff, it firms it all up. We actually found a JK that had been hit in the right rear corner, and we were blown away at how well that corner stayed together. And we got into it, and when you get into the right rear corner on a JK, there's a lot of structure built into it. And so we're like, well, maybe if we just stiffen up the body or stiffen up the hinge and stuff and make a better hinge that'll, instead of these little pins that they use factory, use larger ones, larger bushings, all that kind of stuff. Maybe that'll be good enough to hold a spare tire. And, you know, in the beginning, we're thinking, you know, if we do this, it'll probably hold up to like a 35 or something. But, and we still say that it'll hold up to a 37. I've run 39s and 40s on my rigs, and it's held up great. So it's been a really impressive product. And we just released our hinge tire carrier for the JL last month, I think. So we're excited about those too.
So does the JL also have that reinforced area on the right rear like the JK does? No?
No, it doesn't. And so that one was a little bit trickier, and it took us a lot longer to come out with it because we had to figure out how we were going to make that stronger so it didn't flex all over the place. Because if you did the hinge exactly the way we did our last one, then as soon as you went down a bumpy road, instead of the tailgate flexing, now that whole corner of the Jeep was flexing. And so we ended up using a forging that ties the two hinges together on the outside of the body. And then the hinge on the tailgate part is also stiffened up. So by stiffening up both of those, it made it so that it works very well.
Okay. So what other any other products that you consider innovative that Teraflex does differently than everybody else?
Yeah, we came up with some really cool ball joints that are adjustable, and we came up with steering that has those same adjustable ball joints in it, and those work great because you know, you go wheeling and you beat the crap out of your Jeep and everything, and if you wheel them like I do, then you end up needing to come home and replace a bunch of parts. But those adjustable ball joints and adjustable tie rod ends are really nice because you can just, if they're starting to wear out, you just snug them up and go for it again. And you can go, since we made those, I actually haven't replaced any of mine. I've been able to, I think we started doing that in, that was probably 2015, maybe 16 that we started doing that. And I haven't replaced any of my ball joints in any of my Jeeps or any of my tie rod or drag link pins either.
Wow, that's
a
pretty
good
awesome testament. Yeah.
And then we also make like the big brake systems, and now we've moved on from the big brakes to the Delta brake system, which is really nice. And we started making wheels. We do the Nomad wheel, and it has a cool feature in it to where when you're setting up the wheel and tire package, there's a dump valve that basically you open it up and it's spring loaded, and you can adjust that spring to set the pressure. But once you've set it up, basically you can open that thing up and it'll dump. It only takes like 30 seconds to dump all the air. If you're pumped up to like 35 on a 40-inch tire, it takes like 30 seconds to drop it down to whatever the pressure is that you set it to, and then you just close it up and go. So like if you go and undo the first one and just go in the same order, tightening them up that you loosen them up in, it's about as fast as you can go loosen them all up that you're tightening them back up.
Wow.
So it's really fast for airing down.
And that's a separate valve stem, basically, or is it
Yeah,
the
so
valve stem itself?
it has a regular Schrader valve stem on one side,
Okay.
and you can get the Nomad wheel with a plug, or you can get it with the dump valve.
Okay.
And if you get it with the dump valve, you have that key feature. If you don't, then you're just buying our wheel for the style, I guess. But it's awesome. I thoroughly enjoy being able to get out, undo those suckers, and be ready to roll, aired down in, I don't even think it takes 2 minutes.
Wow. And the products that you guys make are Jeep specific, correct?
Yeah, mostly. That wheel, we're actually making some 8 lug ones and some 6 lug ones and stuff. We made the 8 lug ones mostly for our axles.
Okay.
So guys, axles can buy them. But then we got some people asking us to make 6 lug ones for like the Toyota guys and all that kind of stuff. So we made some 6 lug ones, but primarily we do just Jeep stuff. And in the Falcon stuff, we're doing F-150, Ram 1500, Chevy 1500, and we have some of the 3/4 ton and 1 ton truck stuff coming out here pretty soon.
Oh, okay. So stepping outside of the Jeep brand itself.
Yeah, because like the wheels and shocks, the innovation that we've put into those, you can basically apply to any vehicle. So we're kind of stretching on those a little bit, but primarily most of the parts that we make are just for Jeeps.
Okay.
And mostly for the Wrangler specifically. Like you look in our catalog and there's I think we're up to almost 160 pages, and I would say 95% of that is just Jeep Wrangler stuff. We do make a few unibody things, but not a ton.
Right. You've gotten away from the XJ type stuff that you started with. Well, what you kind of started with, but you're not making, when you say the unibody stuff. So for like the Patriot and some of the other the Grand Cherokees or things like that, correct?
Yeah, we make a few things like just most of the unibody platforms. We just make a simple lift kit that's fairly small, like 2 inches or less, and that's about all we do with them.
Okay.
And we've been working on getting all of the unibody vehicles to have at least something, but they're making them and changing them fast enough that it's not that easy.
Right. And then, what are the numbers of the people buying those that are looking to really upgrade and use them off-road, those kind of numbers to justify the R&D and then the manufacturing.
Yeah, and that's kind of what kicked us off of making stuff for the Cherokees and Grand Cherokees was the numbers on our sales were just so low that it cost us more to keep any of the stuff on the shelf than anything. So, real estate's not cheap, and if it sits there, you're losing money on it. And so when the numbers got so low that it wasn't worth it, we just started bailing on that stuff.
So let's talk about some of the people that work at Teraflex.
Okay.
I know Vincent Pratt is your, what is he? Is he what's his position?
So he's moved up in the company from stuff in boxes in the production area clear up to he is my vice president of sales and marketing.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah, he's been with us, I think, since 99 or 2000. I can't remember.
All right. And then Dennis?
Dennis is, I can't remember what his official title is really, but he's kind of the face of Teraflex, and he goes out and does dealer trainings and stuff like that. And he's the guy that drew the short straw, and he has to be on all of our videos. And
but he's got a great personality for that. He really does.
That's kind of how he drew the short straws, because everybody loves him and enjoys his personality. So,
right. So if anybody doesn't know who Dennis is, you got to look at, YouTube or the Teraflex website, or go to the Facebook page and find the Dennis Wood videos, and they are priceless. They really are. You guys have done a great job in using his personality, to tie in with the company and everything. It's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, Dennis has definitely been an integral part of our success with videos and stuff like that, because he doesn't have to act or anything. He's just who he is, and it's just enjoyable to watch, and he's pretty funny, and so it just works out great.
So you're third generation running the company.
Yep.
What's the fourth generation coming up look like?
Well, my dad has, I think, 24 grandchildren.
Wow.
And I don't know if there's any of them that wouldn't be interested in running the place. So I would say that that's definitely something that you couldn't guess right now.
Okay, I can say that out of 24, yes.
But yeah, like my kids love it, and my daughter works here right now. She's working in production, putting kids together and stuff like that. And my oldest son is begging me to work here as soon as he can, and he will be, I'm sure. And
he's a talented driver.
Yeah, he's been pretty lucky to be able to drive as much as he has and get as much seat time on. He's the only one of my kids that I have and will let start driving with an automatic, but I shut that down pretty fast, because I let him start driving raw when he could just barely see over the dash and push the brake pedal. And I quickly decided, because I love to drive a manual, that he's going to have to love it. So as soon as he could push in the clutch all the way and see over the dash, we started wheeling together. So,
well, he's competed at Delta 2 years with us now?
No, this year was his first year.
Oh, this year was his first year. Okay.
Yeah, I would have loved to have done it last year, but we didn't get to have it because of COVID and stuff. But
true.
But yeah, and the first year that I found out that you would allow kids that were younger to drive, I was competing, and I didn't bring a Jeep for my son, and the Jeep that I had set up, he couldn't really drive it because the seat wasn't adjustable or anything. Otherwise, I probably would have had him compete. But yeah, he was all amped about it. He was super excited. He got second place, and he's definitely grateful that you put on that kind of an event, and excited about doing it. He raced BMX and stuff, and so he loves competition. And I raced BMX too when I was a kid. So we love to compete, and competing with Jeeps is just even more fun.
Right. It's a that BMX seems to be a good stepping stone for a lot of the interviews that I've done.
Yeah, it's such a great it's a great way to compete. You can compete on a personal level. You don't have to have a team and stuff like that. Like growing up in the area, I played baseball and did some basketball at the church and stuff like that, and all these other kids were super into sports, and so I always felt like I was the odd man out that was clumsy and stuff like that. But out on the racetrack, there was always kids that I was beating, and there was always kids that were beating me, but I just felt like it was up to me instead of up to the team, and I wasn't dragging anybody down by competing, and so I really hung on to that and enjoyed it.
Yeah, I seemed myself to excel more at individual sports than I did at team sports. And I don't know why that was. I'm not sure. But that's been my background. I didn't race BMX. They didn't even have BMX bicycles. Nobody knew what it was. I mean, we were building our bicycles to be able to go take them more off-road. But there was no such. I mean, BMX got started when I was, getting into my mid to later teens.
Yeah. So you probably had Schwinn's with banana seats and all that kind of fun stuff.
To begin with, yes, and then we'd
Yep.
take, I think the first one I had, we got rid of the banana seat and put on, I put a seat from a road bike, a Campagnola or something like that, however you pronounce it, a Italian
Right.
bike, and I took the seat off of it and put it on my Schwinn, and then everybody in the neighborhood started doing it.
Yep. Yeah, it's the bikes are just a fun way to go, and it's a good way to learn rhythm and speed and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a great way to start.
Yeah, it's again reading terrain.
Yeah.
So did you guys feel, or did you personally feel that that the JK platform really changed the off-road or saved the off-road industry?
Yeah, for sure. Because with a family, and I might think about this all the time because I got a big family, but with the older Jeeps, you got a maximum seating of 4 people, and it's not really that great if you're trying to reach over tires and tubs to buckle kids into car seats and all that kind of stuff. So the JK having 4 doors, I love Cherokees, but I also hate Cherokees because you can only wheel a Cherokee hard for so long before everything starts coming apart on you.
Tearing up.
Because they're unibodies. And as soon as that 4-door JK came out, I was like, oh man, this is going to be a game changer. Because now all of a sudden it's justifiable to be a daily driver and something you can take out in the woods. And it had a real frame under it, and the wheelbase that they put into it was awesome. And there's so many things that they did that was good with the JK. And you could still remove the top, you could still remove the door, so it was still a Jeep. And you could fold the windshield down. That was a joke because it was hideous with the windshield folded down, and it was such a long and painful process to get the windshield down. But you could still do it if you really wanted to. And so I was super excited about it. I actually had an LJ at the time, and I wheeled that thing and loved it. And it was pretty basic. I just had a 3-inch lift and some 37s, and really loved that Jeep. But when it came to loading kids into car seats, it was a nightmare because you got your body in the way if you're trying to reach in the side, or you got to climb in behind the front seats to get into the back. And it was just too inconvenient. And so in 2009 was when I got my first JK. We had Teraflex ones and everything that we were able to use and stuff like that. But my first personal one I got in 2009, and man, I just loved that Jeep. It was so convenient, so fun. And it was the first new vehicle that I'd ever purchased.
Okay.
So that was cool. It was funny too. I went down to the dealership, and I just sold my LJ, and I had 23 grand that I got from that. I go down, and back then you could get a JK for like 25 or something. And our guy that we've been buying Jeeps from since the beginning of Teraflex, he gives us a pretty decent deal on stuff. And so I was able to get that thing for 23.8 out the door. And I was just ecstatic to have this bone stock, tiny tires, because the only options it had was an automatic and a hardtop, and didn't have any cruise. I was lucky that AC was standard. It was a great Jeep. I loved it.
Well, I think, because of the economy and the recession, depression, depending on where you were at, what it created across the United States, especially in our off-road industry, is that, the businesses that were able to pivot were and create their products around the JK, or at least even businesses that could do the work on them, really help them survive that depression time. And the JK, I think the timing on it was perfect. Brought so many new people into the market, but I think it saved the off-road industry on the whole.
Yeah, I think so too, because you're getting all these new customers, because it's justifiable for families. It's more convenient. There's so many more areas that you can use it, because you could use it for a daily driver, and it was decent enough to drive, like the older Jeeps. A TJ is okay to drive, but a JK is so much better to drive if you're driving a daily or going on a road trip or something like that. It's leaps and bounds ahead. And just the comfort level, all that kind of stuff, it made it so that there was a lot more people that wanted to get into a Jeep. And because there were so many more people that wanted to get into a Jeep, now you have all kinds of different kinds of customers. And it was crazy how fast in 2008, you could tell that TJs and LJs were complete toys, because as soon as the essential money was all you had, a lot of these guys that do construction and all that kind of stuff, a lot of those guys are our customers, and as soon as they were living on the bare minimum, all their expense on their toys dropped.
Right.
And it was interesting, because now you've got these guys that are JK owners, and there was all kinds of old Jeepers, new Jeepers, people that didn't even think about going off-road. They just wanted this thing to look cool. So you got all this other market that is gravitating towards the Wrangler, and we were selling JK stuff like crazy, and our TJ and LJ stuff just dropped so hard and our Cherokee stuff at the same time dropped so hard, we had to rethink things and make sure that we were taking care of these JK customers, because that's where all of our sales went to.
Right. And like I said, I think that was just great timing, and it hit at the right time. I mean, the customer base is not just outdoorsy or the contractor type that used to be involved in off-road. It's now everybody and anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're at a Jeep dealership and anybody walks in, you have no idea which ones are going to ask for a Wrangler.
Right.
If it was me in there, I would assume they're all going to ask for a Wrangler.
Exactly.
And then you're shocked by the guys that are, I want a Grand Cherokee. Okay.
The ones that are decided they don't need the off-road anymore, or that they just want that station wagon, more of a station wagon style. Which I have to admit that's where I'm at now. I don't consider myself a hardcore wheeler. I'll do the Moab trails, I'll do the Rubicon trails like that, but I don't go looking to go thrash and bash, on the super rock trails. It's not it's not my style any longer. I like the scenery.
Yep.
Although I don't mind putting cones on those rock piles.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the middle, where I still love to seek out really fun technical driving stuff, but I also love to go out and just be the beauty. There's a lot that I've seen out there, and I still plan to see a lot more, and you don't need an extreme rock crawler to see most of it. And if you can have your Jeep that you can drive to these locations and go do the trails and drive home, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I noticed is we did for the magazine For Low, we did what we called an ambassador tour, and we started off in a lifted TJ, and then the TJ that we were driving, it smoked a motor, so we called Nina Barlow and said, "Hey, we need to finish this up." So she got us one of her JKs, and I didn't want to turn it back in because the amount of driving that we were doing, the TJ, even though it was perfect for the trails that we were doing and the parks that we were visiting, the JK was so much more comfortable. It was, it just was really hard to just not keep it.
Yep. Yeah, and it's kind of funny too, because everybody says, "Oh, that 3.8, that's a garbage minivan motor," and people complain about the 3.6. "Oh, it doesn't have enough power." But like, I jump back in the TJs and I'm like, this isn't any faster. You got this 4-liter, and it's not any faster than that 3.8 or that 3.6 that I was driving. The 3.6 was definitely a jump up, and it's great that they did that. But I have a lot of friends that complain about the 3.8 motor, and I'm like, you know what? You go jump in a 4-liter with that 4-speed automatic, and you'll be happy to have a V8 or a 3.8.
Exactly.
Because they don't have torque like the 4-liter had, but they got the horsepower where you need it.
Yep.
And there's still great reasons to do V8s and all that kind of stuff, because you can never get enough horsepower. But even though they're a V6 and they don't have the low end torque like that straight 6, I still think they're a great motor. And I still think that the 4.0 is a great motor too. I love those in my TJs, but I think if they would have put a 4-liter in the JK, it probably would have been a bad call.
I agree. I don't think that, I've driven for years and years and years and years now that 6-cylinder 4-liter, and they're big and heavy. Like you say, they have the torque. They don't have, without the gearing, more transmission, in closer ratios. You just don't have the power to load them down or to tow with them or anything like that. And, when you take a smaller motor and, again, weight, and be able to get the gearing correct, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and the other thing about the V6s is all of a sudden we were putting 513s and 538s in these things, and people are excited about that. But with a 4-liter, that wasn't really that great of an option, because that motor didn't like being at high RPM.
No.
And the 6-cylinder, it doesn't mind. It likes the $3,000 to $5,000 area.
Yep, that's one of the things I noticed. That's why the Cherokee that we're building now, the 98, is got an LS based motor in it, so that I can tow with it. That's the whole reason.
Then you can have the torque and the RPM that you want.
Yes. So what's on the future for Teraflex? Just I would imagine the Gladiator is something that you guys are working with.
Yeah, we're still Jeep through the 2-liter turbo, the 6-cylinder, those motors with e-torque, the diesel, the 4xe at us, and we've that's a lot of different motors when you're used to the JK, that you had an automatic and a manual, and in 2012 they changed it to the 3.6 and stuff. But we've been spoiled and able to come out with all kinds of different stuff, because we haven't had to modify hardly any of our standard suspension and long arm kits and all that kind of stuff. But with all the different motor options that they're offering in the JL and the Gladiator, we've been struggling to keep up with coming out with new products for these things, because we have to verify and test and everything works with each different one. And And then they added the 392 as well, which I am so grateful for. I love that motor, love that Jeep. It's an amazing rig. They should have done that a long time ago. But anyway, we're still trying to get our JL and JT offerings up to what we had our JK up to. So we'll be building bumpers, and hopefully we'll get some rock sliders out and stuff like that, and maybe some racks and stuff like that. Our suspension lines are pretty much dialed in. I think we have a few things that we still need to do, but for the most part, we've got our suspension, steering, all that stuff kind of dialed in for the JL and the JT. But we're going to start working on some of the other stuff now to fill out the line.
And is that because of packaging, and is it not so much the motor, but just the frame and all the components that causes that?
Yeah, it's frames, brackets, putting batteries in weird places, and when they did some of the different stuff, we did our long arm kit on the JL and everything, and all these brackets for suspension, the drop brackets to help the geometry if you're doing a short arm and stuff. We did all that, and then they came out with the diesel, and there's a few different modifications that had to be made to make those work. And then our shocks, we have that reservoir that goes to the side instead of down parallel with the body, it goes perpendicular. And that was running into some parts that they changed on the diesel and the 392, and I believe the 4xe has those same changes. So it's just like when you get projects done and then they come out with new stuff that it doesn't work with, you're starting over again.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
So we're still working on coming out with all the things that we had for JKs for the JL.
Okay.
And as far as on the horizon, we're just going to keep doing what we were doing with the JK, and anything we can think of that's going to improve the JL or JT, we're going to keep going with it and trying new things. And we have how the JLs in the 3.6 motor especially smoke really bad on steep inclines.
Right.
We have a kit that is available to order now. I think they'll be shipping out either the end of this week or the first part of next week, but they make it so that you don't have to have one of those catch cans or anything. It basically adds a second PCV valve to the front of the motor, so that if you're on a steep incline, instead of sucking up oil from the back of the motor, it vents from the front of the motor and allows you to not smoke like crazy on those inclines.
Well,
which I'm
awesome.
pretty, because that's one of the things that I've hated about the JL. And the JK had the same problem, but I feel like you could go steeper with the JK before you ran into that problem with the 3.6.
Okay. I have not driven the JK or the JL. I've not driven at all yet. The JK I had, I had a limited amount of time in it and nothing, too extreme. So I didn't know that was a problem.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. Like we were down in Moab in October, and I was out wheeling with my engineers, and we did Mickey's hot tub, and some of the engineers had never seen anybody drive through Mickey's hot tub. So I was driving, and as I'm coming out the other side, all of a sudden it starts smoking, then it started knocking, and when it started knocking, I shut it off, and we ended up having to get it down to where it was level, and then I bumped the starter to get it to see if it was going to be in a hydrolock situation and stuff, because it was knocking. And I didn't realize that if you bump the starter on that, it doesn't quit until it smokes the starter or the vehicle starts. So
Wow.
It smoked the starter so fast, it was ridiculous. And when we did that, this smoke situation was something we'd been wanting to fix since the 2012 JKs came out. But it's never been a high on the priority list until the engineers were actually out there and saw it happen, and they're like, no, this needs to get fixed, because changing a starter out on the trail is dumb. And the time that it took us to figure out that it was a starter, like we were calling guys in town, and they were calling repair shops and stuff that are down there in Jeep rentals companies and asking if they've ever seen this. And I called Just for Fun Motorsports and talked to Curtis, and he's like, oh yeah, they do that. You need a starter. And I was like, are you serious? Like it didn't even try to crank. It just made a click sound, and then it smelled like electrical fire. And he's like, yep, you need a starter. And so we ended up buzzing another Jeep in and had somebody meet us at the trailhead with a starter, and we were able to change it out and get out before it got dark. But I was like, that's really dumb. And it's crazy that it's the first time I experienced it was just last October, because like with our first jail that I built, we did Carnage Canyon, and we did the Rubicon, and we did trails in Moab and all that kind of stuff. And I never had that issue, but I guess some Jeeps have it worse than others. And that Jeep that we were driving that day, it just sucked the oil up so fast, it was ridiculous.
That's incredible. I didn't realize that was an issue. So that's good to know that you guys have got a fix for that.
Yeah, and that's cool because it'll probably only take like 15 minutes to install. So
that's
really
even
nice.
better, especially for somebody like me.
Yeah.
Just because I don't even change my own oil anymore.
Yeah.
I hate to admit that, but living on the road, it's difficult.
Yeah. As much as people say that they maintain their vehicles, I have a hard time believing them after all the maintenance stuff that we've gone through. And now we try to make our products as maintenance free as possible, because that's what people need, because they really don't pay attention to their vehicles that much.
True. That's very true. The only one I've got my Ford Raptor, and that one I religiously change the oil and do the maintenance on it. But my old XJ, no, not so much. But the new one with the V8 in it, I'll probably be a little more religious on it.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, because like I complain about that, but I just changed the oil last week in my TJ. I was trying to figure out when the last time I did it was. I'm pretty sure it hasn't been changed within the last 3 years. And it doesn't seem 3 miles, but still.
Yeah, just sitting the oil, it's not good for that, that period of time. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I want to say, Ben, thank you. Is there anything else that you guys are doing, or personally that you're doing that you want to share?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. I just hope everybody's enjoying life. We've had last year with social distancing and all that stuff. I was like, other than the inconvenience of throwing a mask on and stuff, I was enjoying the heck out of it. And I hope people are just getting out and enjoying life, because, being forced into situations where you're not riding in planes or not gathering at events or whatever, it's not all bad. And I really enjoyed it. Yep. Some of the things I was disappointed with, like missing the Delta Classic last year, but I was super excited that we were able to do it this year. And I hope that that's a tradition that keeps going in our family, because I definitely love that.
Well, it's a tradition that we're going to keep going as long as Millard County will let us do it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on Conversations with Big Rich and sharing your history and the business's history. And want to wish you all the success in the world in the future.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it.
All right. And you have a great day.
Yeah, you as well.
Okay. Thank you. If you enjoy these podcasts, please give us a rating. Share some feedback with us via Facebook or Instagram, and share our link among your friends who might be like-minded. Well, that brings this episode to an end. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll catch you next week with Conversations with Big Rich. Thank you very much.